in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. Now, as I was saying, he is farther down the road. What we found out last time when we met is that there were people from Samaria. They were trying to hold up the building of the temple. If you go back just another verse or two, when Zerubbabel and Jeshua were laying the foundation and getting ready to do the temple, they came in, they said, hey, let us help. And it was dishonest of them because they really did not want to see it built. In one way or another, they were going to put an end to it. And Zerubbabel says, we have nothing in common spiritually. He doesn't say spiritually, but that would be the intent. Verse 4, then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and frightened them from building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their counsel all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now, we've looked at the book of Nehemiah, and we already know about the persecution and the opposition. And so you can't say deja vu over again, because this is the very first time, in a sense, that it's happening. When it happened later, and when it happened in the time of Nehemiah, that's deja vu all over again. But we see that. Now here in verse 6, again it says, now in the reign of Ahasuerus. So let's look at this chart and notice the highlighted ones. These are the ones that are mentioned specifically in the book of Ezra. We've already had Cyrus the Second, or Cyrus the Great. He was the great deliverer. Isaiah even spoke of him and said, he's the one who's going to let my people go back to Jerusalem. Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 and following. So we've already talked about him. And then you had his son, and then later on you have Darius the First, and he's mentioned in this. And then you have Ahasuerus. Ezra chapter 4, verse 6. He is also Xerxes. So Xerxes is his Greek name, but Ahasuerus is his Persian name. So here we are just jumping way ahead of Darius, and we're going to Ahasuerus. And then he's going to jump ahead to Artaxerxes. And when he's done with Artaxerxes in verses 7 through 23, then he's going to go back to Darius, where they are now. Okay? Here's another way of looking at it. If you will, this is parenthetical. I write with a lot of parentheses, maybe too much. But there's things that you don't want to put it in your sentence, but you want to put it in the thoughts and minds of your reader. So I will often use, like Greek words. I'll usually do that with the definition of Greek words in parentheses. So this is the parenthetical mention of the opposition. All right, so you remember this chart from the very beginning? You remember in 606 or 605, that's when the first deportation of Judah happened. And they were taken to Babylon. So not everyone was taken, but Daniel was taken. There were 3 deportations, and the third one was at 586. All right? And it was around 538 that Cyrus said, the Lord spoke of me in the book of Isaiah that I'm to let you go back to Jerusalem. And so here we see Cyrus there, the second Cyrus the Great, 550 to 530. And so this is what the book of Ezra is about in verses or chapters 1 through 6. They're going to rebuild the temple, but they don't get it done right away. It takes some 20 years for them to get it done because of this opposition. Well, what's going to happen next is Ezra's going to talk about Xerxes or Ahasuerus. Now, he comes into power during the book of Esther. And obviously Esther, Hadassah, I love that name, she becomes the queen. And even though the word God is not used in the book of Esther, the providential hand of God, or as R.C. Sproul used to say, the invisible hand of God, is certainly there because it spared the Jewish people. And so he wants to talk about this for a moment. Even though this is later than what he's talking about, this is going to explain the Jewish plight. It's going to explain the quote by Tevye, I know we're your chosen people, but once in a while, could you choose someone else? Well, let's take a look at this here then. Let's take a look at the notes. I thought this was very good as far as an introduction. It's letter A, the chronology of the kings in Ezra. This section that we're in now represents later opposition, which Ezra chose to put here as a parenthetical continuation of the theme. Here's the theme: opposition to resettling and rebuilding Judah. And if you notice, verse 6 says, now in the reign of Ahasuerus, or now in the days of Ahasuerus. So you could see that he's made a parenthesis here. He's talking about what's going on at their time, and now there's a parenthesis. Now, let me tell you about something. In the reign of Ahasuerus. Now, he's not writing to the people who are going through it. He's reading to the people who are going to read this later, like us. And what we find out then is that he first referred to the opposition from Israel's enemies under King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, who ruled at the time of Esther. And that we really enjoyed going through Esther. Again, we looked at Esther, we looked at Nehemiah, and now we're going back and looking at Ezra. That's okay, and we did that because we went through 1 Kings and 2 Kings, and it was like, okay, we've got to do this. They're in captivity. We've got to study the book when they get out of captivity. All right, so we see this here then. It recounts the opposition, he ruled in the time of Esther. And then Ezra's going to go ahead again. So here's Xerxes during the time of Esther, and now he's going to write about Artaxerxes. Ezra chapter 7 through 10 is in the time of Artaxerxes. The book of Nehemiah is in the time of Artaxerxes. And of course, we know that when they went to build the wall, they had opposition. There were enemies who were trying to stop them. And what's the famous part in the book of Nehemiah, other than the joy of the Lord is our strength? They worked with a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. All right, so that was how they dealt with the opposition. So that's Artaxerxes, and it was expressed in great detail letter of an accusation against the Jews. We're going to go through that. Now, we're finding a common theme here, and the common theme is no one wants to let the Jewish people rebuild, either in the beginning or in the middle or in the end. What is interesting is that God's invisible hand, which isn't so invisible in these books, Ezra and Nehemiah, he is going to overturn Artaxerxes, who is going to tell them to stop, and then he's going to give permission later on to Nehemiah to go back. Is our God in control? And let me just make this point, an application right from the get-go. You know, the Lord does allow trials in our life so that He can show Himself powerful. We go through a trial. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? How's this going to end? Oh, my word, I'm so worried. You know, you think of 1,000 ways this could work out, and none of them are any good. And then you remember that God is in control, and He's working out His purposes. And no one, not even us, can thwart that. Well, we read on. It was successful in stopping the work, as the king's reply indicates in Ezra 4, 17 through 23. All this was the ongoing occurrence of severe animosity between the Israelites and Samaritans. And we talked about that last week, which was later aggravated when the Samaritans built a rival temple on Mount Gerizim. The opposition to Zerubbabel picks up again at Ezra 4:24. So we're not going to look at it tonight, but when we're done with this section, we're going to go back to verse 24, and it's going to be during the reign of Darius, who actually reigned before either Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes. All right, so now that we're looking at Ahasuerus, so as we said before, he's the same as Xerxes. He was the son of Darius the First, Darius the Great, and he was the grandson of Cyrus the Great. He was the king mentioned in the book of Esther, and it was Mordecai through Esther that Ahasuerus was influenced to give the Jews liberating rights in light of the Jewish opposition. Okay, remember, he made a decree. He made a decree that on a specific day, that's when it's Jew season. It's time to go get the Jews. You can kill them, and you can take their possessions. And in Persia, once you made a decree, you couldn't change it. Now, Nebuchadnezzar could. He could say, kill the Jews one day, don't kill the Jews the next day. But in Persia, once you made that decree, you couldn't change it. But what he did do, under the influence of Esther, is he made another decree saying, okay, now the Jews, you can fight back. You can do whatever you have to do to protect yourselves. And of course, the whole thing fizzled out. The whole thing fizzled out. So in essence, the Jews were saved from annihilation, either full or partial. Well, let's look at his empire, Ahasuerus' empire. So under Xerxes' rule, he controlled the Persian Empire from India to Ethiopia. That's how big Persia was. And that was also including Egypt, and that's very important. He had over 120 provinces, and we read that in Esther chapter 8, verse 9. However, he was never able to conquer and subjugate Greece, okay? He was never able to do that, but he did conquer Egypt, and he had such a big reign. Now, notice, if you will, in verse 6. Now, in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign. Okay, so we're not talking necessarily about the book of Esther now. We're talking about the beginning of the reign of Ahasuerus. And Egypt was beginning to rebel when he first came on the scene. And he had to go deal with Egypt. These